Have you ever wanted something not because you truly needed it, but because someone else had it? A car, a job, a lifestyle? Something that felt more valuable simply because it was out of reach? This, my friend, is the insidious nature of mimetic desire. We think we want the object, but what we truly crave is the being of the person who possesses it. We see someone else enjoying a certain lifestyle, a certain status, and we unconsciously absorb their desires as our own. We mimic not just their actions, but their very wants. We convince ourselves that we too need that specific thing, believing it will bring us the same happiness we perceive in others. But it's a mirage, a carefully constructed illusion. This is where it all begins. Desire isn't born in isolation. We see someone else wanting something, and suddenly we want it too. This isn't about survival, it's about imitation. Rene Girard discussed mimetic desire. The idea that we don't just desire things, we desire what others desire. But here's the problem. If many people chase the same thing, conflict is inevitable. Not everyone can have the same status, the same recognition, the same wealth. And when two people want the same thing, competition becomes personal. It turns into rivalry, resentment, and eventually chaos. But chaos isn't sustainable. Societies cannot function if everyone is locked in endless conflict. What do you do then? This is where the scapegoat comes in. A simple, brutal solution to a complex problem. Instead of fighting each other endlessly, people come together to blame one person. The scapegoat becomes the sacrifice that restores order. They are accused of being the root of all problems, the reason why the group is suffering. And because people need peace more than they need truth, the accusation doesn't have to be real, just convincing. In the past, this meant literal sacrifices. Kings, priests, entire societies would choose a person to bear the sins of the community. And through their destruction, stability was restored. Today, we don't burn people at the stake. We don't throw them off cliffs, but we do something else. We cancel them. We destroy their reputation. We erase them from public life. Social media has become the new execution ground, where the mob decides who is guilty and who deserves exile. And once someone is labeled, everything about them is open for attack. Even outright lies become acceptable because, for a brief moment, the crowd feels united in their hatred. This is why modern outrage is so addictive. It's not about justice. It's about finding someone to blame, someone to purge. But if you think this means that justice has been served, think again. Because the real problem, the root cause of the conflict, remains untouched. And before long, the cycle will repeat itself. This constant comparison, this endless striving, breeds discontent. We're trapped in a cycle of wanting, acquiring, and then wanting more. The goalposts keep shifting. The finish line remains perpetually out of reach. We're on a treadmill of desire, constantly running but never arriving. And the worst part? We often don't even realize we're on it. We're so caught up in the chase that we fail to question the very nature of our desires. Are they truly ours, or are they simply echoes of someone else's aspirations? This is the question we must confront if we ever hope to find true contentment. Next, we'll dive into how society has built invisible walls to control mimetic desire, sometimes successfully, sometimes failing spectacularly. Part 2. Have you ever wondered why some people seem completely content with what they have, while others are always chasing the next big thing? Why some societies collapse under their own greed while others find a way to stay stable? Desire, if left unchecked, leads to conflict. But societies aren't blind to this. They have always tried to control it, to shape it, to make sure it doesn't tear everything apart. And over time, different cultures have built invisible barriers, rules, traditions, philosophies, to manage the chaos of mimetic desire. Some of these worked, at least for a while. Others just pushed the problem underground, waiting for the right moment to explode. Religion was one of the earliest tools. Instead of letting people endlessly compare themselves to each other, religion introduced something bigger. Gods, the afterlife, divine justice. If your neighbor had more than you, it didn't matter, right? A higher power was watching. And envy? That was a sin. Christianity warned against coveting your neighbor's possessions. Buddhism taught detachment, seeing material wealth as an illusion. Islam encouraged generosity and warned against excessive greed, and even promotes socialism by the ritual of giving to poor from the rich. Hinduism framed desire as something that binds people to suffering. The message was clear: don't get too attached, because none of this really belongs to you anyway. But human nature doesn't change just because we're told not to want something, so societies added another layer: hierarchy. The idea was simple: if you couldn't compete with someone, you wouldn't desire what they had. Kings were untouchable because they were chosen by the gods. Priests and scholars had wisdom beyond the reach of ordinary people. The rich dressed differently, spoke differently, lived in separate areas, making sure their world was distinct from everyone else's. By keeping people in their lanes, direct competition was reduced. You envied your neighbor, but not the king, because he was never even in the same race as you. Animals quickly can make hierarchy, but it is really tough for humans. Then came capitalism, the great paradox. On one hand, it inflamed desire more than ever before. Advertisements, social media, luxury brands, everything is designed to make you want what others have. But on the other hand, capitalism channeled this desire into a specific kind of battle. Competition through money, not violence. Instead of overthrowing the rich, you were told you could become rich yourself. Work harder, play smarter, invest wisely. This was the new battlefield. And in a strange way, it kept society from collapsing. Not because people stopped wanting, but because they were given a structured, predictable way to chase their desires. But here's the thing: these systems only work for a while. When people start believing the game is rigged, when they feel that no matter how hard they try, they can't win, the old instincts return. They start looking for someone to blame. And this is where the scapegoat comes back into the picture. Because when a society fails to manage mimetic desire, when the competition becomes unbearable, people don't rise up against the system. They rise up against a person, a symbol, a villain. And they believe that if this one person is removed, everything will be fixed. In the next part, we'll explore how scapegoating works in the modern world, how people are chosen as sacrifices, and why, no matter how many times it happens, it never actually solves the real problem. Part 3. Do you ever notice how, when things go wrong, people immediately look for someone to blame? Not the system, not the circumstances, just one person. One name, one face. This can be anyone, but must be neutral. Why do we need a villain so badly? Desire spirals out of control when frustration builds up, when people feel like they're losing a game they never agreed to play. Society doesn't ask hard questions. It doesn't analyze the deeper structures of power, inequality, or manipulation. That would take too long. It would require self-reflection, and that's uncomfortable. Instead, society does what it has always done. It picks a scapegoat. A scapegoat must be someone visible but not powerful enough to fight back. Someone who can be sacrificed without the system breaking down. If the person is too important, punishing them might destabilize the entire structure. If they're too insignificant, blaming them won't feel satisfying. The perfect scapegoat is someone who exists in the middle, close enough to be recognized, distant enough to be disposable. Philosopher Rene Girard studied this pattern deeply. He argued that when communities reach a breaking point, they don't fix their real issues. They unite by channeling all their anger onto a single target. It's a purification ritual, an ancient reflex disguised as justice. But it's not about truth. It's about restoring a sense of order. The moment the scapegoat is punished, there's relief. People feel like something has been solved, but nothing has actually changed. This is why scapegoating is dangerous. It's an illusion of resolution. It convinces people that the problem was a person, not the system that created the problem in the first place. And the worst part, the truth doesn't matter. When a scapegoat is chosen, facts become irrelevant. The more helpless the person is, the more ruthless the mob becomes. In those moments, society allows and even encourages pure fiction. Anything can be said, any accusation can be made, because for a brief period, lies feels like justice. Social media has taken this ancient ritual and made it more efficient. In the past, societies had to gather in physical spaces to turn against someone. Today, the digital mob forms instantly. A tweet, a headline, a clip taken out of context. That's all it takes. And suddenly thousands, sometimes millions, pile on. Most don't even know the full story. They don't need to. They're not seeking truth. They're seeking the rush of collective destruction. But here's the irony. Scapegoating never actually fixes the problem. If the root issue isn't addressed, the cycle repeats. Another crisis, another scapegoat. The names change, but the pattern stays the same. And for those watching from the outside, it feels predictable, almost scripted, because it is. Part 4. Have you ever seen someone's entire life ruined overnight? A name trending, accusations flying, and before you even understand what happened, their reputation is gone. How does this happen so fast? Why do people jump in without knowing the full story? When a society is restless, when frustrations pile up, the people in charge know one thing. They need to release the pressure before it explodes, and what's the easiest way? Find someone to blame. This isn't new. It's an ancient pattern, perfected over centuries. The trick is simple. Make sure the scapegoat can't fight back. A scapegoat who can resist isn't useful. They have to be isolated, voiceless, unable to defend themselves. If they're too strong, they turn into a martyr. If they're too weak, the punishment doesn't feel satisfying. The perfect scapegoat is someone big enough to be noticed but small enough to be sacrificed. This is why public figures, especially those outside the establishment, are easy targets. If they have just enough influence to be recognized, but not enough to control the narrative, they're ideal. Take away their voice, deplatform them, discredit them, drown them in accusations. Once they can't speak for themselves, the mob takes over the story. And in that moment, truth doesn't matter. What matters is closure, the illusion of resolution. The moment the scapegoat is destroyed, people feel like justice has been served. But what exactly was solved? In the past, societies would sacrifice people, literally. Executions, exiles, public shamings. Today, we don't hang people in the town square. We cancel them instead. But the psychology is the same. It's about purging the collective guilt, finding an easy answer to a complex problem. It's not about fixing corruption, injustice, or inequality. It's about giving people something to point at, something to say, there, that's the problem. And once the target is gone, life moves on. Until the next crisis, until the next scapegoat. Social media has made this worse. It rewards outrage. People who expose and attack others get more attention, more engagement. And since humans mimic each other, one accusation turns into hundreds. The collective anger builds like a storm. Everyone wants to be on the right side, so they rush to condemn, often without even checking the facts. And here's the darkest part. Even if the scapegoat turns out to be innocent, it doesn't matter. By then, the damage is done. The apology, if it ever comes, never gets as much attention as the accusation. Why do people fall for this again and again? Why do they keep thinking that punishing one person will fix everything? In the next part, we'll go deeper into the psychology behind this, why people need scapegoats, why they crave the illusion of justice, and why this cycle will never end. Part 5. But the real danger isn't just in the scapegoating itself, it's in the cycle it creates. Each time we engage in it, we reinforce the idea that problems can be solved by punishing an individual. We begin to believe that justice is served when we destroy a life, and that it will restore balance. But it doesn't. In fact, it only perpetuates the very system that led to the crisis in the first place. And so, the cycle continues. A new crisis arises, a new scapegoat is chosen, and the collective outrage burns bright for a moment before fading away. The problem isn't solved. In fact, it's only been buried deeper, waiting for the next explosion of mimetic desire and the next scapegoat to take the fall. Eventually, we have to ask ourselves, what is the alternative? If mimetic desire is inevitable, if the pursuit of status and validation is built into the very nature of human society, how can we break free from this destructive cycle? How do we stop repeating the same patterns over and over again? By becoming more aware of the forces that shape our desires, we need to start questioning why we want what we want and whether it's truly our own desire or just something we've absorbed from others. Are we striving for success because it brings us joy, or because we've been conditioned to believe it will? Or is it simply a reflection of the envy we feel toward those who have what we don't? Understanding the root of our desires is the first step toward freeing ourselves from the endless chase. But it's not enough to just become aware. We also need to create new structures that don't rely on mimetic competition. We need systems that promote genuine connection, not comparison. Systems that encourage collaboration instead of rivalry. At an individual level, this means focusing on our own values and goals, not those set by the outside world. It means finding contentment in what we have, rather than always chasing something else. It's about slowing down, recognizing the value in the present moment, and breaking free from the endless cycle of wanting more. As a society, we can start by questioning the systems that reinforce mimetic desire. From social media to capitalism, from celebrity culture to the obsession with success, we need to ask whether these structures are truly serving us or simply feeding our discontent. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate desire. That's impossible. Desire is part of what makes us human, but we can shift the way we experience it. We can cultivate desires that are more aligned with our true needs and values, rather than the desires imposed on us by society and others. The journey isn't easy, and it will take time. But if we can start to recognize the destructive power of mimetic desire and make conscious choices about what we value, we can begin to create a world where people no longer need scapegoats to feel a sense of peace. And so the question remains, will we continue to chase the mirage, or will we learn to find true contentment in what we already have? Part 6. If mimetic desire is so deeply ingrained in human nature, is there any way to escape it? Can we ever truly free ourselves from the cycle of envy, rivalry, and scapegoating? The answer isn't simple, but it begins with awareness. The more we understand the forces shaping our desires, the less control they have over us. But awareness alone is not enough. We need practical ways to redirect our desires, to create a society that doesn't rely on endless competition and manufactured outrage. This is where the idea of positive mimesis comes in. Not all imitation is harmful. Just as we absorb negative desires from those around us, we can also model our desires on people who embody wisdom, generosity, and virtue. Instead of mimicking status seekers, we can imitate those who find fulfillment beyond material wealth and validation. This is why mentorship, strong communities, and role models matter. If we surround ourselves with people who value purpose over prestige, we naturally begin to desire the same. Throughout history, societies have tried to manage mimetic desire in different ways. Some have relied on religious and moral teachings, urging people to detach from worldly cravings. Others have structured their economies to reward innovation and cooperation rather than cutthroat competition. Some cultures promote humility, discouraging excessive displays of wealth and power to reduce envy. But in the modern world, where social media amplifies every success story and fuels constant comparison, these mechanisms are breaking down. How do we rebuild them? The first step is rethinking how we define success. If success is measured only by wealth, fame, and external achievements, mimetic rivalry is inevitable. What if the highest status was given not to the richest, but to those who contribute the most to others? Some societies have done this, placing philosophers, educators, or community leaders above mere accumulators of wealth. Imagine a world where admiration was given to those who create, heal, and inspire, rather than those who simply accumulate. But we can't just wait for society to change. We have to change ourselves. That means recognizing when our desires are not truly our own. It means stepping back from the constant chase, resisting the urge to compare, and redefining what brings us happiness. It means questioning the systems that fuel resentment and division, and choosing not to participate in the cycle of outrage and scapegoating. Because if we don't, the cycle will continue. The names will change, the methods will evolve, but the pattern will remain the same. In the next part, we'll explore how technology, especially social media, has taken mimetic desire to an extreme, and what we can do to resist its pull. Part 7. Social media didn't invent mimetic desire, but it has supercharged it. In the past, Our desires were shaped by those immediately around us, our friends, neighbors, and communities. But today, we are exposed to the curated lives of millions. We don't just compare ourselves to the people we know. We compare ourselves to influencers, celebrities, and strangers halfway across the world. The result? A society more envious, restless, and dissatisfied than ever before. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter thrive on mimetic desire. They don't just show us what people have, they show us what we're missing. The perfectly edited vacations, the luxurious homes, the curated lifestyles. Every scroll reminds us of what we lack. And because these desires are constantly reinforced by algorithms designed to keep us engaged, we become trapped in an endless loop of wanting more. But it's not just material things. Social media also fuels rivalry in opinions, beliefs, and outrage. When a certain idea gains traction, people rush to adopt it not because they've thought deeply about it, but because they see others embracing it. The same goes for outrage. A single tweet can spark a mimetic firestorm, with thousands joining in, not because they truly care, but because they see others doing it. The desire to be on the right side of an issue becomes stronger than the desire for truth. And then there's the ultimate trap. Virality. The promise of attention, recognition, and validation is intoxicating. Everyone wants their moment in the spotlight, their post to go viral, their opinion to be acknowledged. But this creates a paradox. The more people chase visibility, the harder it becomes to stand out. So they resort to more extreme tactics, more shocking takes, more divisive opinions, more manufactured drama. And in doing so, they feed the very system that keeps them trapped. So how do we break free? The first step is realizing that social media is not a reflection of reality. It's a distorted, exaggerated version of it. The second step is curating our digital environment. Who are we following? What kind of desires are they planting in us? Are we consuming content that makes us feel inspired, or content that makes us feel inadequate? The more intentional we are with our online habits, the less susceptible we become to the forces of hyper-mimesis. But most importantly, we need to rediscover life beyond the screen. Real fulfillment doesn't come from likes, retweets, or viral moments. It comes from meaningful relationships, genuine accomplishments, and personal growth. The more time we spend engaging with the real world, the less power the digital world has over our desires. In the next part, we'll dive into what happens when people finally reject the cycle, what it means to truly liberate yourself from the forces of mimetic desire and live on your own terms. Part 8. What does it mean to live free from mimetic desire? Is it even possible? Can we ever fully escape the influence of others? Or are we doomed to a lifetime of imitation? The truth is, complete independence from mimetic forces is unrealistic. We are social creatures, wired to learn and grow by observing others. But what we can do is choose whose desires we adopt and whose we reject. True freedom begins with self-awareness. The more we understand the desires shaping our decisions, the more we can filter out the ones that don't serve us. Ask yourself, why do I want this? Where did this desire come from? Will it truly make me happy? Or am I just chasing an illusion? The simple act of questioning our impulses can be transformative. Another key to breaking free is cultivating intrinsic motivation. When we do things for the sake of external validation, status, admiration, wealth, we remain trapped in the cycle. But when we pursue goals because they genuinely fulfill us, we take back control. The person who paints because they love art will always be freer than the person who paints to impress others. And then there's the power of gratitude. Nothing disrupts mimetic desire faster than appreciating what you already have. Envy thrives on scarcity, on the belief that you are lacking something essential. But gratitude shifts your focus from what you don't have to what you do. It rewires your perspective, allowing you to see abundance instead of deficiency. Real freedom comes from letting go of the need for comparison. The world will always have people who are richer, more successful, more admired, but their success does not diminish yours. When you stop playing the imitation game, you start defining success on your own terms, and that is the ultimate escape from mimetic desire. So the question remains, will you keep chasing what others have, or will you start choosing your own path? Part 9. Have you ever noticed how, even after a major public figure is taken down, nothing really changes? The world moves on, but the deeper problems stay the same. Scapegoating gives people a sense of resolution, but it's never the real solution. Think about it. How many times has someone been cancelled, removed from power, or blamed for a crisis, only for the same issues to come back later? That's because the core problem wasn't the individual. The core problem was the system that created the conditions for the crisis in the first place. Take political corruption. A leader gets caught in a scandal. The media erupts. People demand their resignation. The leader steps down. Justice, right? But then another politician takes their place, and the corruption continues. Why? Because the structure that allowed corruption to thrive was never addressed. The same pattern repeats in business, entertainment, and even everyday social life. Someone gets fired, someone gets banned, someone gets exiled, but the frustration, the competition, the desire that created the tension in the first place, that remains. Why do people fall for the illusion? 1. The need for closure. People hate uncertainty. Blaming a single person gives them a feeling that the problem is solved. 2. The speed of social judgment. With social media, judgment happens instantly. The mob reacts before the facts are fully clear, and once a narrative takes hold, it's almost impossible to reverse. 3. The fear of being next. People join in on scapegoating because they don't want to become targets themselves. Staying silent can look like complicity, so they participate, not necessarily because they believe it, but because they don't want to stand out. 4. The thrill of collective destruction. There's an undeniable high that comes from mass outrage. The feeling of unity, power, and moral superiority can be intoxicating. It's why public shamings have existed for centuries. The illusion of justice prevents people from seeing the real problem. And as long as people are focused on punishing individuals, the deeper systems of inequality, manipulation, and competition remain untouched. Desire fuels imitation, imitation fuels conflict, and conflict demands a scapegoat. We chase what others want, only to find ourselves in cycles of rivalry and blame. Scapegoating offers temporary relief but never solves the real problem. True freedom comes from questioning our desires and refusing to play the game at all. Thanks for watching.